My name is Sherry. 3 weeks ago, I sat in a lawyer's office, watching my parents' faces contort in shock and disbelief as the lawyer read the will. My dad, Tom, had a realtor on speed dial, and my mom, Lily, wore a brand new designer handbag, convinced they were about to inherit a fortune. But when the lawyer read that my grandfather, Mr. Thompson, had left his entire estate, worth approximately $2,300,000, to me, all hell broke loose. My mom let out a blood-curdling scream, and my dad lunged across the table, snatching the papers from the lawyer's hands. It was a scene straight out of a soap opera, and I sat there, stunned, as the room seemed to spin around me. Let me take you back a bit. I live in a small town called Pinewood. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, and the postman can tell you your family history. The town has a population of about 3,500 and one traffic light that seems to change every few hours. For 50 years, the biggest employer in town was Thompson Construction, my grandfather's company. He started it from scratch, with just a single truck and a lot of determination. By the time he retired, half the buildings in the county were built with Thompson's materials. Grandpa Thompson was 80 when he passed away. They said he died peacefully, but I knew the last few years had been tough on him. I remember driving to the funeral on a rainy Wednesday. The roads were slippery, and I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, trying not to lose it. When I arrived at the funeral home, I expected to be the first one there. I always was. But, to my surprise, my parents were already there. It was strange because we lived in the same city, just 30 minutes apart, but I hadn't seen them in over 6 months. We weren't officially estranged, we just drifted apart. I found my mom in the foyer, hugging a neighbor and dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "He was like a father to me," she said, but I could see through her act. She had a compact mirror in her hand, checking her makeup, making sure her mascara wasn't running. It was all for show. My dad was in the corner, talking to a business associate in a low voice. He was standing up straight, chest out, trying to look important. He hadn't even bothered to call me to tell me Grandpa had passed away. I found out from my great-aunt, Martha. I stood there for a while unnoticed. When my mom finally saw me, she gave me that tight, fake smile and said, "Oh, Sherry, there you are." It was like I was late to a party, not just driven through the rain to say goodbye to my grandfather. The funeral service was packed. Grandpa had touched so many lives in Pinewood. The local shopkeepers, the workers at his company, and their families all came to pay their respects. My mom took charge, organizing the seating, the program, and who would speak. When I asked if I could read a poem Grandpa loved, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Tom will speak, honey. He's the son. It should come from him." So, my dad stood at the podium in a suit that looked like it was rented. He read a eulogy that sounded like it was copied from the internet. He called Grandpa a pillar of the community, talked about family values, and mentioned a book Grandpa supposedly loved, but he got the author wrong. It was Tolstoy, not Dostoevsky. Grandpa would have been rolling in his grave. I sat in the second row, my hands folded in my lap, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I had a piece of paper in my pocket with the poem I wanted to read. Grandpa used to say that the words in that poem made him feel alive. But I kept it in my pocket. Next to me, Aunt Martha reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything for a long time, then very quietly, she said, "Your grandfather knew, honey. He always knew." I looked at her, confused. Knew what? She just patted my hand and faced forward. After the service, I waited until everyone had left, then I stood alone by the casket. I told Grandpa I was sorry I hadn't been there in his last days. I'd had a double shift at the local library, and I'd planned to visit him the next weekend. But he didn't make it. When I walked outside, my dad was waiting for me. He didn't offer any condolences. Instead, he said, "You still have the key to Dad's house, right? We need to get in there and start sorting things." The next morning, I drove to Grandpa's house. It was a beautiful old house on Elm Street, with a big porch and a garden full of roses. The front door was unlocked, and when I walked in, I found my parents in the study. The desk drawers were open, and papers were scattered all over the floor. My dad was on his knees, rummaging through the files. My mom was standing behind him, directing. Check the bottom drawer. He always kept the important stuff there, she said. What are you looking for? I asked from the doorway. My dad didn't look up. Insurance papers, he said. But I knew he was lying. I'd known him my whole life, and the only time he moved with such urgency was when money was involved. They were looking for the will. Tom, the lawyer has all of that. Mr. Harris, I said. I know who Mr. Harris is, he said, standing up with a folder in his hand. This is my father's house. I don't need permission to be here. My mom turned to me and gave me that dismissive look, the kind she gives when she thinks I'm in the way. I stepped back. I'd learned long ago that if I pushed back, she'd go silent for days. When I was 16, that silence felt like the end of the world. Even now, it still made my stomach drop. So I left. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot when my phone rang. The caller ID said Harris and Associates. Sherry, said a voice I recognized from family dinners years ago. This is Mr. Harris. Your grandfather left specific instructions. You need to be at my office this Friday. And Sherry, don't tell your parents what I'm about to say. Mr. Harris had been Grandpa's lawyer for 20 years. He'd handled the sale of Thompson Construction and had drawn up the trust when Grandma passed away. He was a calm, steady man who always spoke in a low, measured voice. He told me that Grandpa had rewritten his will 3 years ago, and the new version was very different from what my parents expected. Your father moved him to a nursing home, Sunny Acres, right after your grandmother's death, Mr. Harris said. Sunny Acres. Just the name made me sick to my stomach. It was the cheapest nursing home in the county, with dirty floors, old furniture, and a staff that seemed more interested in watching TV than taking care of the residents. Grandpa, a man who had built a successful business and had helped so many people, was stuck in that place because my dad had chosen it without even visiting. I'd visited him there countless times. I knew the nurses' names, the smell of the disinfectant, and the way the windows rattled in the winter. Grandpa once told me, very quietly, that he cried every night the first week he was there. What did he change? I asked. I can't discuss specifics over the phone, but you need to be there, Sherry. If you're not present at the reading, contesting the will be much easier for your parents, Mr. Harris said. There's one more thing, he added. Your grandfather also left a letter. He asked me to read it aloud in front of everyone. I sat in the car for a long time after we hung up. I didn't know what Grandpa had left me, or what was in that letter. All I knew was that my family was about to change forever. Let me tell you about the relationship between my dad and my grandfather. When I was 14, my dad asked Grandpa for $150,000 to start a restaurant. He had a name picked out, Thompson's Diner, and he'd even printed up menus. But he didn't have a business plan, a location, or any experience in the restaurant business. Grandpa said no. He didn't say it harshly. I was in the next room doing my homework, and the walls were thin. I heard Grandpa say, Tom, I'd help you if I could, but I'm not going to invest in something that's likely to fail. Come back with a solid plan and we'll talk. My dad didn't come back with a plan. He came back angry. You built your empire, but you won't help your own son? He shouted. I'm trying to protect you, Grandpa said. You're trying to control me, like always, my dad retorted. The front door slammed, and the dishes rattled in the cabinet. That was the beginning of the end. Over the next 10 years, my dad pulled away. The visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. My mom, who had always been the one to organize family gatherings, stopped trying. She sided with my dad completely, saying, Your grandfather never believed in your father's dreams. We owe him nothing. Meanwhile, Grandpa sat in his house on Elm Street, waiting for a phone call that never came. I was the one who visited him every Sunday. It was a 2-hour drive there and back, but I didn't mind. I'd sit on the porch with him, read him books, and eat the apple pie I'd baked from Grandma's recipe. He once told me, looking at the roses in the garden, one day, Tom will realize what he's lost. He paused. I just hope it won't be too late. The night before the will reading, I called Aunt Martha. She picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. Aunt Martha, Mr. Harris called me. He says I have to be there tomorrow. I said. You do, she replied. Aunt Martha, do you know what's in the will? I asked. There was a pause, then she said, I know your grandfather made his choice years ago. He watched Tom leave, and he watched you stay. I didn't stay for any reason, I said. I know, sweetheart. That's the whole point, she said. She then told me something I didn't know. In 2018, when Grandpa had a heart attack and was hospitalized for 2 weeks, Aunt Martha had called my dad every day. My dad said he'd come visit on the weekend, but he never showed up. I, on the other hand, dropped everything. I called my supervisor at the library, used all my sick days and vacation days, and drove to the hospital. I slept in the chair next to his bed for 9 nights. I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of him being alone. You didn't do it for money, Sherry, Aunt Martha said. And your grandfather knew that. That's why he made the choice he did. I stared at the wall of my apartment, thinking about what she'd said.
Okay, I said.
I'll be there.
Good. And Sherry, she said.
Wear something with pockets. You'll want somewhere to put your hands. She hung up and I almost laughed. But I had no idea what was waiting for me in that lawyer's office. On Friday, at 10 a.m., I walked into Mr. Harris's office. It was above an old bookstore, up a narrow staircase with creaky steps. The conference room smelled like old books and coffee. A long oak table was in the center, with 8 chairs around it. My parents were already there, sitting in the front row. My dad wore a new suit, and my mom had her new handbag on the table in front of her. I took a seat at the far end of the table, near the window. Aunt Martha sat next to me. She smelled like lavender and cinnamon, just like always. Pastor Brown from the local church was also there. He'd baptized me as a baby and had officiated at Grandma's funeral. He sat with his hands folded, looking down at the table. 2 cousins, Jake and Lisa, filled the remaining seats. Jake was fidgeting, rubbing his hands together nervously, and Lisa sat still, her face expressionless. A paralegal sat in the corner, taking notes. The room was quiet, but there was an underlying tension. My dad leaned over to my mom and whispered, Once this is done, we can start making plans. My mom nodded and patted his arm. Then she glanced at me, a quick, cold look, and turned away. Mr. Harris entered the room through a side door, carrying a leather portfolio. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses, and opened the portfolio without saying a word. He read the preliminary part of the will, stating that Grandpa was of sound mind and body when he wrote it. The date was May 12th, 2021. Mr. Thompson's estate, Mr. Harris continued, includes the residential property at 12 Elm Street, all savings and investment accounts, and personal effects such as furniture, vehicles, and family heirlooms. My dad sat forward, his hands on the table. Mr. Harris turned a page and read slowly. Regarding my property at 12 Elm Street, I bequeath it in its entirety to my granddaughter, Sherry Thompson. There was a moment of silence. My dad blinked, then looked at my mom. She looked at Mr. Harris. I'm sorry, my dad said. Say that again. Mr. Harris didn't repeat himself. He turned another page and continued, regarding my savings accounts, investment portfolios, and all remaining financial assets, I leave them in their entirety to my granddaughter, Sherry Thompson. My mom's hand went to her chest. There's a mistake, she said. There's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Harris said. That can't be right, my dad said, his voice rising. He stood up, knocking his chair back. That's my father's money, Mr. Harris looked at him calmly. It was his money, Mr. Thompson. He chose how to distribute it. My dad grabbed the papers off the table. These are copies. The originals are filed with the county probate court, Mr. Harris said. My dad stared at the papers in his hand, then threw them on the table. They scattered like leaves. My mom stood up, her face red with anger. He wasn't in his right mind when he wrote this. He was 78 years old, she said. 78, and the will was witnessed by 2 licensed physicians who certified his competency at the time of signing, Mr. Harris replied. Doctors can be wrong, my mom said. These doctors were not wrong, Mr. Harris said. My dad turned to me. Did you do this? Did you manipulate him? I didn't know, I said, my voice small. Bullshit, my dad shouted. He slammed his hand on the table and the water pitcher shook. You were there every week, whispering in his ear, he said. Aunt Martha's voice cut through the room. Tom, she said, and there was something in her tone that made my dad stop. He looked at her, and she looked back, her eyes steady. Sit down, she said. To my surprise, my dad sat down. My mom tried to regain her composure. She smoothed her blouse and said to Mr. Harris, surely my father-in-law left something for his own son, a keepsake or something? Mr. Harris reached into his portfolio and took out a sealed envelope. There is one more item. Your father-in-law left a personal letter. He instructed me to read it aloud, but only if you reacted with hostility to the terms of the will. My dad stared at the envelope. You can't just read some letter and make it legal, he said. This letter is not a legal document, Mr. Thompson. It is a personal statement. Your father-in-law asked me to honor his final wish, and I intend to do so, Mr. Harris said. We'll contest this, my dad said. That is your right, Mr. Harris said. But I would advise you to listen first. Pastor Brown shifted in his seat, and Jake and Lisa exchanged a look. The paralegal stopped writing and looked up. I couldn't take my eyes off the envelope. It had Grandpa's handwriting on it, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and letters. Mr. Harris picked up the envelope, opened it, and said, Before I read this letter, your grandfather asked me to provide some context, a timeline of events that led to his decision. He took out a single-page document and laid it on the table. Even from my seat, I could read the header, Timeline of Relevant Events, 2018 to 2023. My dad went pale as Mr. Harris read the timeline. It detailed how he'd moved Grandpa to Sunny Acres without consulting him, sold the family vacation home without telling him, and had no contact with him for years. In 2018, my dad had signed power of attorney documents and arranged for Grandpa to move to the nursing home. Grandpa found out about the sale of the vacation home from a neighbor. And during the 2018 hospital stay, my dad had promised to visit but never did. Aunt Martha reached over and took my hand under the table. I could feel her grip tightening as Mr. Harris continued to read. In 2021, my mom had blocked my phone number on my dad's phone and told Grandpa that I was too busy to call. I remembered the day I'd called the nursing home, in tears, asking why my dad wouldn't answer. A nurse had patched me through to Grandpa, and that's when I found out the truth. After reading the timeline, Mr. Harris picked up the letter and began to read. Tom, he started. If Mr. Harris is reading this, it means you